One day last year, when Twitter was being used to promote mental health awareness, author Matt Haig reshared his blog post on depression. Without even a teaspoon of schmaltz, he explains how he found himself stood on the edge of a cliff in Ibiza about to end his life, before finding the strength to step backwards and start the long process of first finding out what was wrong, then learning how to actually live. It was one of the most helpful and hopeful things that appeared on my timeline all day, so I passed it on and watched as more people paid it forward too. It was a good Twitter day, the kind that makes you glad it exists, not the kind that makes you worry for the state of the human race. Matt Haig's blog post is now Reasons to Stay Alive, an easy-to-read but powerful book on what depression and anxiety can feel like, how they impact upon the people who love someone with either, and how glorious it feels to teach yourself how to sit with depression without it ruling your entire existence. I had a hardback copy of Reasons to Stay Alive for a fortnight before I plucked up the courage to read it. I eventually just headed to my Audible account and had Matt read it to me instead. Audiobooks are always better for my eyes anyway, and hearing his dulcet tones literally tell his story in his own voice made it all the better. I had avoided it because I didn't want it to make me cry. I'm doing better now. Did I really want to drag up things I now felt comfortable with? The number of tweets I saw from people saying how uplifting and comforting the book had been swayed me. If a blog post on near suicide could make me smile, the book could only do the same. Of course, everyone was right. It left me feeling grateful that he'd written it. It was like making a new friend who had trusted me with all his most private thoughts and secrets. Oh, and it didn't make me cry. My bottom lip trembled when Matt talked about his girlfriend, now wife, Andrea, being his mind-sitter while he was absent from himself, and listening to him reel off a few statistics on male suicide right before turning over to go to sleep was a rookie mistake that kept me awake longer than I should have been on a Sunday night, but it never made me sob. The book also made me wonder if my own experiences would have been different had it existed 5 years ago. I'm inclined to think that it would have given me the confidence to let what was happening to me just happen, without such an anguished fight. If depression or anxiety have visited you in the past, if you're feeling your way through the dark right now, or if you love someone who's learning how to live again, you desperately need to read this book. If you nor anyone close to you has been touched by depression in the past, there's a pretty good chance you're going to cross paths with it in some way, shape or form in the future, so you still need it. Basically, we all need this book. A little over 5 years ago, I developed a severe vestibular disorder. Developed is the wrong word. Developed sounds slow and gentle, like the way an old film negative comes into focus in a photographer's darkroom. This was more like a sharp, unexpected kick to the head. 1 minute I was fine, the next I was practically on the floor in the middle of a city centre branch of Boots. In a split second I became disabled, though I didn't know it at the time. On that day I felt like my body was moving even when it was still. The ground was swaying beneath my feet as if I was trying to stand up in a rowing boat stuck in the middle of the Atlantic. Since that day my body has never not felt that way. It's a 24/7 thing. My brain has never completely recovered from the injury. Since that day, there has been nausea, vomiting, a regular feeling of falling even when sat down, constant adrenaline rushes, big dizzy spells, and a range of movement that varies between I can't stand up and, oh, I can do a bit of shopping today. It's exhausting. Where your brain normally balances your body subconsciously, my conscious mind is having to persistently step in to tell whichever part of my brain is broken not to fall over. I run out of physical and mental energy quickly. Brain fog is a nightmare I've learnt to laugh at. In the past week, I've lost a packet of crumpets only to find them in my kitchen potato basket after 30 minutes of hunting. I've held my front door key up to an ATM instead of my debit card. And just last night I lost a lettuce and found it in my handbag. I could write a book on what living with a balance disorder feels like. For a while I wrote a weekly blog series on it. You can find a link to that below if you want it. I don't update it as frequently now, but I am considering making a video series. I'm just not sure I know what I want that to be yet. Tell me what you think. What nobody tells you when you have to live with a chronic physical illness is what it does to your state of mind. The NHS is one of Britain's most laudable creations, but during the 18 months it took to get a diagnosis, vestibular hypersensitivity, and in the few years that followed, not once in any one of the various hospital departments that I passed through did someone say, "Hey, just a heads up, this is going to completely mash your mental stability. But it's okay, we'll help you." I had to find out the hard way. During the time that I was having brain scans, balance tests, and jumping through all the hoops needed to get the diagnosis, because labels make it easier, I did a lot of reading. I was terrified, and knowledge makes me feel in control and powerful. I hit the books and the internet looking for ways to cope. Everything, and I mean everything, said that living with a vestibular disorder long term can lead to feelings of depression. I didn't believe it. I refused to believe it. I believed how isolated I felt, how my life had shrunk down to a shell of what it had been, how my body had changed, how I'd had to stop travelling even short distances, how I couldn't leave my office during the day to get a coffee because I couldn't physically walk across the street, how I'd lost friends, how it stole the best parts of my personality and left behind the worst, how it had completely crushed my self-worth and self-esteem. But nope, depression wasn't going to happen to me. No siree, Bob, I was going to fight it off. Insert your own Superman pose right here. If reasons to stay alive had been in existence at that time, I would have known it was okay to let it in, to stop battling, to let myself feel the sadness and emptiness that my physical illness was imposing upon me. I didn't know how to. I didn't know I was allowed to. If I went there, what if I never came back up again? Then what would become of me? What I ended up doing was pushing it down. The problem with that, and what Matt Haig articulates so beautifully, is that in trying to outrun it or ignore it, you only make it worse. You can't just wish it away, you have to tackle it. For me, it was like running a bath. You know that drain hole near the taps at the top of your bath that's meant to help it not overflow? That only works if it can drag the water away quicker than it's actually running. And my taps were gushing like Niagara Falls. It didn't stand a chance. Eventually, all the anger, frustration, sadness and grief at my body's new limitations overflowed onto the floor and soaked everyone else around me at the same time. The worst thing was that I could see what this was doing to my behaviour. It was like watching myself from behind a thick piece of glass, banging on it, telling myself to stop being such an insufferable arsehole, but I was in so much emotional pain as a result of what this physical illness had thrust upon me that I couldn't make myself stop. Do you know when I knew I had to learn a new way of coping? When I said to someone I loved deeply that I thought I should get some professional counselling, and for the very first time they agreed. They didn't say, "Only if you want to." They said, "Yes, I think that would be a very good idea." I knew then I'd let the water run for too long. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I had to at least get the taps down to a slow trickle. I didn't do medication. I knew I needed to fix my head and learn a new way of living, not blanket it with nice chemical feelings. For some people medication is the answer, but I already knew I needed to talk. I embarked upon a short but invaluable course of counselling that was one of the most gruelling things I've ever done. My sister-in-law said that the first course was like I was stopping the world from spinning. The joke is that physically my world is constantly spinning, but I knew what she meant. I stopped running away from grieving for the life I'd lost and began the process of accepting the hand I'd been dealt instead of taking my anger out on people I love. When someone you love dies, it's immeasurably painful, but it's final. You have to accept it. I was grieving for an old version of myself that I was never going to get back. I had to find a new me that I actually liked. The year that followed was one of the hardest of my life, not least because I made a massive career change in the hope that working from home would assist my health and give me the energy to learn how to walk a little better again. It has done, at least to a certain extent. Give or take a few months, roughly a year later, I had a single enormous panic attack. It has been my only one to date. Thankfully, I knew what it was, but that didn't make it any less frightening. I had been sitting there feeling rough and thinking to myself that I was going to feel this ill for the rest of my life. I felt like disabled was all I was and all I could be. The panic took over. I resisted at first, but really, I knew there was more work to be done. I went to see my GP. I explained everything to him and he stared at me for a while. He knew. He understood. It was the closest I've ever felt to having a hug without having someone's arms around me. He was, and always has been, excellent. We decided against medication again because we agreed that it might make me even dizzier than I already am. What I needed was more counselling, but the 3 weeks of Zopiclone he gave me just to establish a better sleeping pattern were dreamy, literally and figuratively. 4 months later, because, NHS waiting lists, I was called to a new course of counselling. I don't want to say that this counsellor saved my life in the traditional sense. I've never reached the point where I wanted to end my life. In fact, my sadness came from not being able to live enough. But she taught me how to live again, albeit a different life to the one I'd known 5 years ago. She gave me the tools to rebuild my self-esteem, made me feel like I was worthy and had things to offer, taught me how to reframe achievements so I'd actually feel proud of myself when I managed to walk around the supermarket or sit through a sensory-attacking concert. Most of all, she helped me learn how to be me again. For the first time in years, I liked myself, even with a body and a brain that refused to cooperate with each other so I could walk properly. Right now, I feel okay. Some days I think I'm doing pretty damn fantastic. I'm still disabled, still tired. My vestibular disorder still kicks my arse daily, and sometimes it tries to derail my mind too. Bad days happen to the best of us, but I come back to the middle ground far quicker than I used to now that I know which mental buttons to push. I needed to go out today, but my legs don't feel stable enough to carry me where I need to go. I'm slightly irritated by this, but it can wait until tomorrow. I'm easy breezy about it. My self-esteem has improved massively too. I recently scanned through my Instagram feed and it struck me that I'd really like to be friends with myself. Even having gone through the most challenging years of my life, even having been changed forever by them, and even though I'm still living with something that limits me, I still feel immensely lucky. It sounds odd, I know, but I feel lucky because even on my worst days, I've got reasons to fall back on. I can pinpoint why I'm sad, angry, flat, whatever. I have the luxury of knowing why those things are happening to me. I don't have the guilt of feeling like I have nothing to be sad about. For thousands of people living with depression or anxiety, there doesn't have to be a reason. There can be events in their lives that have damaged them, but there doesn't have to be. As Reasons to Be Alive repeatedly drives home in the most comforting and reassuring way, depression doesn't discriminate. It can happen to absolutely anyone and should bring no more shame than any other illness. Depression is not failure. Why are you sad when you have nothing to be sad about? Is the worst question in the world. It's a reasonable one, but it's one that only adds to the stigma and secrecy of mental illness. When there is no specific reason, it makes the person answering feel abnormal. It's reasonable because when someone we love isn't doing well, we want to know how to help. The process of learning how to be there without adding pressure is worth the effort though. I can say that because as well as being on the answering side, I have also asked the "how are you feeling today" question of people who I love. I have experienced both sides of this coin. Loving someone with depression can be hard work. Actually, loving them is incredibly easy. Understanding what they're going through is hard. I'm not saying that to make anyone feel guilty or burdensome, but it's difficult being on the receiving end of someone else's depression. You'll probably be used as the punching bag to thrash out their frustration and anger. You might get pushed away and rejected because you make it all feel too real and interrupt the pretense that it's not happening. Alternatively, you might get held too tightly because they're afraid of what happens if you're not there. But never assume that you're not needed. Some of the most lovely sections of Reasons to Stay Alive are when Matt talks about Andrea. Their partnership and how she effectively held him up through numbness and the most frighteningly erratic times of his life are an example of just how being there makes all the difference. To have an Andrea of your own is to already be a step ahead of depression. This post has been heavy, for which I tentatively apologise. Reasons to Stay Alive is the opposite. It's testament to his natural skill as a writer that Matt Haig manages to talk about a subject we're all slightly afraid of with a lightness and an ease that few could pull off. It's funny, knowing, hopeful, and remarkably soothing to read or listen to, especially to listen to. He is living proof that you can be both happy and live with depression if you have the right coping mechanisms and a network of support. And yet, he's lost none of the importance nor the gravitas of what he needs to share by doing it in a friendly, relatable way. Aside from the beautifully told narrative of his own depression and recovery, there are expertly woven in sections on how, for example, we teach boys and men not to cry. There are conversations he's had with himself in his own mind, which you may recognise. The news that people with severe depression repel any form of kindness, happiness, even a stranger's smile because it short-circuits and breaks down their defences was a revelation to me. Of course, that makes so much sense now. There are pieces on how to spot your own warning signs and lists of what to say or do in particular situations. There are lots of lists, all of which are either smile-inducing or useful or both. What I'm telling you is, I have been depressed. I love people who have or who have had depression, and I have learnt more from this book than any other source of information I've sought out. We all need these words.